Welcome to Postpartum Unfiltered.
The podcast where we get real about what happens during the postpartum period.
I am Jillian,
And I'm Sarah.
and we are two doctor moms who were not prepared for what postpartum would bring.
By sharing your stories, we hope to spread awareness and allow other families to be more prepared for the time after birth.
Hello, and welcome to Postpartum Unfiltered. Today, we are back with Allie for part 2 of her story as we explore her second experience with birth and postpartum. Thanks for coming back, Allie.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Allie, as far as your second experience, how was it different? And how was your postpartum experience the second time? The same? And what did you learn kind of from that?
It was so different. Wow, it was just so different. So it was different because I was done with chiropractic school. I was really excited. I could actually relax in my life. I had a small business, but I was only working part-time. I could pick my own hours, so it was flexible. I think I had just got my first house, so I was like really excited about other things too. Again, I was having a healthy pregnancy, and early on I decided, all right, I'm going to do midwives this time. I'm going to do it different. So I forgot to mention, but originally I did have an OBGYN with my first birth up until 30 weeks. I was around 30 weeks, I decided, oh, I don't align with all the things that the hospital wants to do. Mm-hmm. So I had told him that, and I said, is it too late for me to transfer? And he's like, no, look, we have this midwife group that works with us. They also deliver at the hospital. And I actually had to get his permission to switch, which I was like, really? I have to get your permission? It's my choice. But anyways, So I had transferred at 30 weeks to midwives, and I did have a pretty good midwife, but I still had a bad experience. That was mostly the hospital's fault though.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm doing midwives all the way this time. With my second, I'm like, we're changing this. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to do home birth midwives. I wasn't going to do the hospital again because I had a lot of hospital trauma. And I'm like, right, I want to try this different. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you guys know, but there's a lot of different types of midwives. Mm-hmm. Do you know that? Yeah. Oh my gosh. I didn't know that at first. So it depends on what state, but in my state, there's 4 different midwives. And I wrote it down because they all sound so similar. So you have certified nurse midwives, certified professional midwives, then you just have certified midwives, and then you have traditional or unlicensed midwives. So there's 4 types in the state of Ohio. So I'm like, okay, which one do I want? Well, luckily I was working in the birth world, so I had known some like personally. I'm like, okay, well, I think I know who I want to work with. And they were the highest of the tier. They're certified nurse midwives, which means they have some sort of nursing degree. It's either RN or they can be nurse practitioners. So the ones I picked were both nurse practitioners, and they were a team, which I liked. Mm-hmm. Because you never know what's going to happen. You got 2 midwives, that's great. So I was seeing them. We went through my history, and I got to the point where, like, I don't know, I was around 32 weeks and my baby was Breech. And they're like, look, in the state of Ohio, certified nurse midwives are not allowed to deliver Breech. So you're going to have to find another plan or another midwife. And it could have been one of those other midwives because they got loopholes. Or they're like, or we recommend we co-care with an OBGYN. So that's what I chose. I found an OB that they liked. He was known for doing a lot of VBACs. He was pretty supportive. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not really going to need him. I figured my baby will turn this time. It's not going to happen to me again. But I went and I saw him, and I liked him. He was very matter of fact, but he was also like pushing the boundaries of the policy of the hospitals. And he was atypical in that way. He really did give the patient I hate this word, autonomy. Am I saying this
Autonomy?
Right? Autonomy. There you go. My brain is done. Ever since having kids, it's done.
You don't really need it.
All of us.
Yeah.
Autonomy. I should have wrote it down. Anyway, he's really good on patient autonomy. Maybe we could just edit that out. I'm joking.
Yeah, we'll fix it.
So yeah, that was a totally different experience. Like I felt way more empowered. I knew what I was doing. Then here comes 36 weeks. That's when my midwives were like, okay, we can't follow you anymore. Like, your baby's Breech. We're not going to deliver this baby. So we recommend you either stick with your plan with OB, or you can even get a new midwife. I'm like, I'm going to get a new midwife. You know what? That's what I'm going to do. So I knew another midwife who I was close with, and she's a traditional unlicensed midwife. So this is like the ones who deliver the Amish. They have no rules. It's like, some people think it's kind of sketchy, but I knew her. I trusted her. I was comfortable with it. So she was comfortable with delivering a VBAC Breech baby. We knew that was a possibility, and she was okay with it. And she also had found another midwife who had lots of experience with it. So I was going to have, again, 2 people in my corner. But I still had that OB in my back pocket. You know, he actually is amazing. He lets all of his patients have his number and page him. And so he's on call for all of his patients. And he was a FMM, you know what I'm talking about? MFM?
A fetal maternal
Fetal maternal medicine doctor.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We'll get there.
You know what I'm saying? So, you know, he dealt with high risk a lot. So the fact that he would have all of his patients be able to call him as long as he's not on vacation, like that, I thought that was amazing. I might not, you know, I would know who was going to be delivering my baby for sure.
So were you considered high risk because you were still breech at 36 weeks?
I was considered high risk just because it was a VBAC.
Okay.
And maybe the preterm played into it, but they never mentioned that specifically.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyhow, I ended up having a transfer. I started laboring at home. And as soon as my midwife got there, I said, hey, look, I had meconium in the toilet. But to me, from everything I had studied, that was a little normal. You know, it wasn't as abnormal as they want you to believe. That was my belief. Everybody can look into it on their own, decide what you want to decide.
Mm-hmm.
So we weren't concerned about that specifically, but my blood pressure was high. And we had agreed if anything happens out of the ordinary, we're just going to go with plan B. So I was like, all right, I'm volunteering myself to go to the hospital. So we called the OB on the way to the hospital. He lived in the same town as me. Don't ask why I know that, but I knew he was basically my neighbor.
Card pulled.
Like, look, if I'm leaving,
Yeah.
you're leaving. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was okay. I felt like I knew who this was at least, and things are going better than before. But once I got to the hospital, you know, he wasn't there yet. And the staff were not supportive of anything to do with breech babies. And the doctor on call wanted me to go in for emergency C-section. When I was being triaged, she kept advising me. And I was just like, no, that's not the plan. I mean, my doctor, like, we have a plan, but even the nurses were like really stressed out about it. And so like right away, my hospital experience is traumatic. It's not going the way I expected it to. Everyone's giving me their advice. Nobody's supporting me. They wouldn't let my birth photographer in because they still had like their COVID rules. I did manage to get my midwife in. She offered to come in almost like a doula because she is also a doula. So I at least had some support with me. But when I was in the room to labor, nobody offered me any support. That was totally different than my first experience. I don't even know if there was a bathroom in there. Nobody asked me if I had to go to the bathroom. I literally do not know if there was one in there. There had to have been. Nobody said, hey, look, the door's over here. I had no idea. That was a blur. I just remember like continually ripping off the gowns that they were putting on me and using them to wipe the blood and meconium off my legs because nobody was taking care of me. I just wipe it, throw it. I'm like, I'm not wearing that.
Yeah.
Anyways, I needed to use it.
It's covered in blood and guts.
So nobody offered, you know, like a peanut ball or anything, which was totally different than my first experience. I had gotten that nice experience of normalcy because nobody knew my baby was breech the first time. It was a surprise. This time I come in and we all know he's breech. It's not a surprise. And they're treating it like emergency right off the bat. But I'm just like, wait for my doctor. But he came in, and the policy with him in the hospital is that to do a TOLOC, a trial of labor after cesarean, it has to be in the OR. So I knew I was going to be pushing in the OR just in case of an emergency. So shortly after he arrived, he's like, okay, you're ready to go back and push. I forgot to mention, but I did get an epidural electively because I was very stressed out. All of these people shoving their opinions down my throat. I couldn't think straight. I didn't have any of the support I was supposed to have. I wasn't able to even do any of my hypnobirthing. Like, it was not a good experience. So I was like, I need some control back. And that's how I chose to do it, was through the epidural. And it helped me a lot. It cleared my head a lot. So going into the OR, I was like, okay, I can refocus. So I had a trial, the TOLOC, and right at the end, they started to prep me for a C-section because they only give me 2 hours to push. And it was like literally a few minutes away from 2 hours. And my doctor's like, okay, we're going to switch to the C-section. And I was like, you know, what can I do? Like, this is what I agreed to. And as they were putting the pads on me, My doctor's like, actually, he's really close. Or he didn't say we didn't know again what my baby was, but he's like, I'll give you one more push, because I think the baby would be born faster that way than it would take us to get you finished prepping for your C-section. So I didn't actually deliver that baby on that last push. It took me about 2 more, but he gave me 2 bonus pushes, I think. So I did have my baby on that last final attempt. But then right off the bat, things didn't go well. He had poor APGAR scores, low tone. I didn't know any of this until after the fact because I'm just exhausted. They called the NICU in and took him away from me again. So it was another kind of traumatic experience. Not another good postpartum. So I didn't get skin to skin again. They did kind of like put him by my face for a minute, and my midwife took a picture. So I have like a picture. I don't even know if I looked at him. I was just like so out of it.
Yeah. And how far along were you when you delivered this time?
40 weeks in 5 days.
Okay.
Which I didn't even realize this, but I stopped seeing the OB like the last 2 weeks because I was just like, no, I don't need to see you unless it's an emergency. So bye. So I didn't know how my baby was measuring, like size wise or anything, but I would have been more nervous had I known that he had a limit. He doesn't let you do a VBAC, specifically if it's breech, I think, if it was like over 8 pounds. And so my baby was exactly 8 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So
everyone's pushing the limits the second time.
Yeah, he's like, you're lucky because I wouldn't have even let you try had I known. But it was like I didn't go to that last appointment or whatever.
And how did he present coming out? Was he a frank breech or a foot, or do you know?
I think he was frank breech. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you had the epidural, but could you feel him come out at all?
Unfortunately not. I was really, really frustrated. That's not what I expected,
Yeah.
That's totally not what I expected. I thought I would be able to feel more. I kept asking to reposition on the table because the whole time I was laboring, laying down was miserable. I needed to be standing. I needed like gravity to like move him. But when you go in the OR room, you have to be laid down. That was the rule. So I was like, can I at least lay on my side? Because I was so uncomfortable. And they tried to let me, but the table was like tipping because it's not a wide table. It's not made.
That doesn't make me feel good about surgery.
They were literally, somebody was like holding it to like counter pressure it. And I'm like, I think this is a bad idea. Guys.
Yeah. So we're not doing good here.
So and then one of the nurses let me try tug of war with like a sheet. Somebody did offer to bring a mirror in. So like, I think these were just like nice nurses. So I couldn't see the mirror though, because my pillow was so flat. I'm like, I can't see anything. Like, I need like 6 more pillows. Like, how am I supposed to?
When they told me about the mirror, I honestly thought it was a handheld mirror, but they rolled in a full length mirror.
They were
like,
nobody even mentioned a mirror. I didn't know this.
Where do you store these full length?
This is the first time hearing about mirrors. There were no mirrors.
They offered it to me.
There was no mention of mirrors. They did ask me to touch my son's head the first time. And I was like, yeah, can we just get him out? They were like, his head's right there. Touch it. And I was like, yeah, I feel it. Can we
it is
keep
a
going?
Full length mirror, girl. It is a full length mirror, like your door, like, and they roll that thing in.
Oh.
Yeah,
I would have been into that.
Beauty and the Beast. It's not like this. It is like full length. Like, and nobody warned me because I was like, I don't want a mirror. And they were like, you want a mirror? I was like, no, I don't. And they were like, you did. Like, Josephina, go get the mirror. I'm like, oh, great. I'll hold this mirror and push. No, it's a whole thing. They roll in.
Nobody told me about the mirror. I had no clue. Okay. Anyway, so you couldn't see the mirror because of no pillows.
No. And I think I had asked, like my husband was trying to take pictures. I said, can you take a picture so I can see what's going on? Because I can't feel it. Yeah. And then he got yelled at for taking pictures because this was a teaching hospital. So that doctor who was on call, who I really didn't like, she was still technically delivering my baby, where my doctor was just like the teacher.
Yeah.
So he was like next to her, coaching her. She was still in the room and she was the one hands-on, but he got to make the calls.
Yeah.
And so she yelled at my husband for taking pictures. And I was just like, I need to know what's going on down there. So that might have been why they brought the mirror, because they might have like heard that interaction. But so I ended up like grabbing my feet. That was the way she wanted me to do it. She's like, you're making the most progress.
Yeah.
And because I had to like curl up my torso to grab my feet, I could see his butt and legs pop out. Like when the like the final push came out, that reflex basically.
Yeah.
I saw it for like a second, but then they grabbed him so fast. So I feel like I barely saw it.
Yeah.
it was still cool, even the small amount I did see.
No, that is really cool. How long was he in the NICU for?
So he was in the NICU for 14 days.
Oh, wow.
And so his was more severe, which here I was like going into my second NICU experience. I'm like, I'm a champ. I know what happens. Like, I can do this. Like, I already know. But it was worse. So it was a little more stressful because he was diagnosed with moderate encephalopathy. Basically, like he came out, no tone. He was like blue. And he did require to be intubated, but then he extubated like shortly after on his own. So it ended up being okay. But they were just saying like he didn't get enough air while I was pushing for an excessive amount of time. Or maybe his cord was pressed, against my pelvis or something.
Yeah.
That was what they were saying. So basically they're like, hey, your baby, the first lady who came in to talk to me was the student, because it's a school, like a teaching hospital.
Yeah.
And she was horrible, bedside manner.
Oh,
Clearly,
God. What did she say?
Wonderful.
First of all, she comes in, she drags the chair and sits down in front of us. We're like, this can't be good. Like, she just dragged that chair across the room and sat down and crossed her legs and like puts her head down. We're like, okay, our baby's dead. Me and my husband both looked at each other. We started crying.
Oh,
we're like,
my God.
our baby's dead. And she just said like, oh, it's really, really critical condition. And so these are some of the words that stood out to me. And I hate to say this, but she did have an accent. So it wasn't very clear to understand some of what she said, but these are words that I heard. Critical condition, and we have to get the on-call doctor to come in. He'll make the final assessment and he'll tell us basically the diagnosis and what our plan of care will be. And she just kept saying over and over and over again, critical condition. Because we're like, well, how's he doing? How's he doing?
Is this before you got to see him?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I remember I got that quick picture.
Yeah.
So technically I saw him. But yeah.
But
so this was before we saw him. So I think it was like 4.5 to 5 hours before we got to meet him.
Wow.
Yeah. So
again, and the first thing they do is come in and say critical condition.
Yeah. And they're just
multiple
like, oh,
times apparently.
Yeah, over and over. And so I just kept bombarding then she leaves. I kept bombarding my postpartum nurse for updates, and she really couldn't help me. She felt so bad. She was a sweetie. She actually wiped my tears while I was crying in the OR. I'll never forget. And she held my hand. So she was sweet. But at one point, my doctor came in, my OB, and he's like, hey, I went and saw the baby in the NICU, and he's moving fine. He looks really good. He looks like a totally normal baby. He's like, I would be surprised if they admit him. But I'm not a neonatologist, but I would be really surprised if they admit him and end up doing, there was this one specific course of care that he had mentioned. It's called a cooling blanket. And I didn't know that at the time. So like, I was like, what are you saying? Yeah. Like, he said, my baby looks good. So I'm taking that. Like, that makes me happy. So that was really good because that was the only way we could get an update. He had to go to the NICU and then come back and tell us that. And he did that as a courtesy. So that was good.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, though, this teaching hospital was not nice. It was dirty. I told my husband, this is dirtier than a motel.
Oh, like, no.
I don't even sleep in motels, but I would not stay in this place if I had an option.
Yeah.
Of course, they were in the process of building a brand new building. It just wasn't going to be done for like 3 months.
Oh, wow.
So
how are you feeling emotionally now? Like, you didn't have to do the C-section, which seemed like one of your goals, but now your son is in the NICU again, and you're in for this kind of uncertainty with that. Right.
It was horrible because my husband and I were so elated at first. We were so happy, and like nobody was celebrating with us. And we were just like, what's going on? Nobody's celebrating. We don't really know what's going on. And then after that student came in and said the critical care thing, then we were just like crying. We were not excited anymore. We were like, we're bad parents. Like, we shouldn't have done this. We should have just had the C-section. Like, that's pretty much what everyone was suggesting who was talking to us. Like, that was the feeling we were getting from people. Not in so many words, but that was the feeling we were getting at that point. So I was already very sad before I even met my baby. I'm like, okay, what did I just do? And then my husband just kept saying, no, your doctor was there. That was his decision too. And he supported you, and he told you that we could do that. Right. Yeah. So, and I was like, okay, you're right. Like,
it wasn't just you, like it was him, and he also agreed with your plan. So
right.
Also gave you support in your decision.
Right.
I feel like
so now,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the next thing is I went to my postpartum room and I still hadn't met him. So finally they, took me out of the labor and delivery room that I was sitting in, moved me to postpartum. It's really dirty and gross, but at least I didn't have a person in the room to share with. I was grateful for that.
Yeah.
I still had the room to myself. And here comes the pump. Time to start pumping again.
Oh gosh.
Can't
Yeah.
wait.
Della's
Haven't
entering.
met my baby. I thought I was going to breastfeed. I was so excited to breastfeed this time as soon as my baby was born. Anyhow, I was like, I wonder if I'll be able to pump this time. And I did. It was okay. It went about the same. I ended up oversupplying. One of the nurses literally told me they'd never seen anybody pump that much milk in their life, which I found hard to believe. But I was like, she's like, I've been here for 27 years and I've never seen anybody make that much milk before. I'm just like, okay. And they're all telling me like, there's no more room in the freezer. You have to save room for the other moms. And I'm just like, what do you want me to do about it? Go put it on the freezer.
Turn the faucet off. Got it.
Yeah.
So there was one silver lining. I'm like, okay, my body can do one thing. It's making milk. So I'm like, I might suck at delivering or something's at this point. I'm like, something's wrong with me. Like, I don't know. But so I was sad, but I was feeling pretty strong because I had been through the NICU experience before.
Right.
And so at that point I was like, I think we can do this. Like, it's actually not that bad. But that was before any diagnoses were given or anything. So maybe some false confidence there.
Yeah. So did you stay in the hospital the entire time again while your son was in the NICU?
We did it because we had my 5-year-old, which at the time he was not even 4 yet. So he would have been like, 3. So we did it because he was his grandma stayed with him, but he was missing us a lot.
Yeah.
So
it's hard.
I think what we ended up doing is the room was uncomfortable. We ended up just visiting all day, like a full hour, 8 to 9 hours. I think it was 9 hours. We came every day. And then we would go home at the end of the day, stay the night, come back top of the morning. So that's what we did. We stayed at home, but we were there for 9 hours. And then sometimes we would meet up with my other son for lunch. But sometimes we just were like, no, we don't have time to go back home for lunch today.
Yeah. And so how did that feel for you going through that experience?
That was really hard. I think I cried so hard every night. It felt really hard to leave him. It felt so frustrating for me. Like, I just felt like a failure. I remember saying over and over again, I need to be with my baby. My heart was breaking and I didn't feel that way my first time. So I'm not sure if it was the distance or what it was. Maybe I felt less committed in a way, but yeah, no, that was much harder this time.
Did you feel like you bonded as quickly with your second child as you did the first time?
No, I meant to mention. So after like finally getting to meet him, which I don't know, it was roughly 4.5 hours, he was already put on his protocol, his treatment of cooling blanket. And the type of cooling blankets that our hospital has are not mobile. So you're not allowed to move the baby. So we weren't allowed to hold him. We were told we could like touch his feet and his hands. So we could barely touch him at all. So bonding was harder because I can't touch this baby. He was on morphine at first. And then they gave him some sort of anti-seizure drug. I am blanking on the name of it. It'll come to me probably. But so he was like asleep at first, for most of it. Now I can't touch this baby. I definitely didn't. I was like, I'm definitely not breastfeeding him because he's not allowed to come off the blanket.
Yeah.
So
right.
I didn't breastfeed him for, I think he was NPO for like maybe the first 4 or 5 days. So it was a lot longer compared to my first experience. And I was pushing so hard. As soon as he was off the cooling blanket, it was like another 48 hours. He has to be at room temperature. And like they had all these like, you think it's just 72 hours, but it's not.
Yeah.
So when he was finally like allowed to be touched and held, I was like, okay, we need to start breastfeeding. But then they were like, no, he can't breastfeed because he's on, phenobarb was the seizure medicine. So I had to get them to find the neurologist and agree to take that off. And it was me fighting. But we did end up finally getting a chance to breastfeed, and it went really well early on with him. So
that's awesome. Was your, I was going to ask the same question. How long did you breastfeed?
How was your physical healing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, but you went to physical. I thought we were good. Anyway, either question. How was the physical healing? Did you tear it all since he was breech?
I think I did end up tearing I remember my midwife looked at me and she's like, you did so good. Like you barely even tore. But then I like went back to my notes because I was like, what does that mean? Like, how bad was it?
Yeah.
So, and it said something like three stitches, I think it said.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Didn't feel that bad, but she said it wasn't that bad. I'm not totally sure. Nobody really mentioned it. I think our priorities were elsewhere. So
Yeah.
it's just whatever. But obviously I didn't have that before. So it's definitely itchy compared to my C-section. I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
But physically I was feeling really good. At first I was like, wow, this is way better. I kept saying, I'm like, this is so much better. Like, I never want a C-section again. Like, what the heck?
Mm-hmm.
At first, but maybe it was like, again, some endorphins and stuff, like making me feel good. And then all the nurses kept going, you're really swollen. Like, so they didn't seem to agree with what I was saying.
Yeah.
They're like, are you sure you're feeling good? I'm like, I am.
Yeah.
But, I ended up getting like a donut pillow to sit on in the NICU. So it did. I was like, oh yeah, sitting down doesn't feel good. Like it doesn't feel normal. So I used a donut and that helped a lot.
That's awesome. And then how long did you breastfeed each time?
I think we put more stress on the breastfeeding than they did. They still like timed it and everything. So it had to be like, to be graded as like a successful breastfeed, it had to be more than like 8 minutes and like less than 20, I think it was. Like they literally graded you. Like, so I'm like, okay, we got to get to 15. Like he would start to get drowsy and I'm like, no.
Yeah, right.
So
Keep going.
I think the average was honestly around 10 to 12 minutes he would nurse.
Okay. Yeah.
Did you have depression as well the second time or?
I don't think so. I felt really good the second time. But what I did notice about the second time was I had like rage and anxiety in a different way, which I was like, oh, this must be like that postpartum rage and anxiety that people talk about. Because I was a nut about cleaning the house, like pretty bad. I was like really, really frustrated if people didn't keep the house clean the way I wanted it.
Yeah.
Oh, I still have
and that lasted a lot longer, I feel like.
Yeah. And did you
go ahead.
I was just say, how long did it take you to recognize that?
Well, I started therapy pretty early on because of the trauma, obviously, that I wasn't expecting. And I think she had made it kind of obvious to me, like, okay, there's something extra here. And I'm like, oh.
She's like, how about all those times you've been raging?
It was within a month. I was like, okay, yeah.
Okay. And how was your therapy experience? Was that helpful?
It was lackluster. I don't know. No, it was just talk therapy. I was really hoping to do like the EMDR, but I couldn't find a therapist who was available, who took my insurance, yada yada.
Yeah.
So it was whatever. It was like talking to my mom. She's just like, "Did you take your vitamins today? Like, what's your goal for tomorrow?" I'm like, "Okay."
Get off
like
my
I called my mom.
lady.
But I did something. I was like, at least I'm trying it, you know? And I think I did it for a couple months, like less than a year. She ended up discharging me. We just like ran out of things to talk about. And I'm like, okay, I must be doing better. But my anxiety is still there. So the anxiety hasn't went away, which sucks. So that's totally different. We went to Disney and I kept getting overstimulated. I was like crying on this one ride. It was really loud. There was no windows. I got really claustrophobic. I'm like, what is this? My husband's like, that's anxiety. I'm like, this sucks. Like, I'm like, I didn't know that's what that was.
Yeah.
And like, I was having fears of flying on planes because I felt trapped. And I was like, whoa, I couldn't get an elevator for a little while.
Did you have any
elevator? And I started crying because it was just really slow and I thought we were trapped.
Yeah. Did you have any claustrophobic like anxiety before?
I did have some mild claustrophobia growing up, but I used to use elevators and stuff all the time and not even think about it. So like, it was like, the only time I was claustrophobic is if somebody like put me in a headlock. I'm like, okay, get off my head. Yeah. Now it's like, I can't even be in an elevator, you know? Sometimes I would get panic attack in a car if I wasn't driving. I was like, ooh, I feel really small in here in the car. So
interesting.
I actually I was out with friends and we were in an Uber in a very small, fancy Tesla. And I didn't know where the handles were. I'm like, oh, I've never been in a Tesla before. There's no handle. And I was freaking out. I felt like my power was being taken away. Like I had no control of my space around me. And I had to have him pull over. He put my window down because I was like, oh, I just need to some fresh
Yeah.
air. It
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
helping. And I'm like, pull over. And then me and my friend switched seats. I had to sit in the front seat and she went in the back, and she's like super tall. So I felt really bad for her. But I was like, I need to be in the front. And I'm not going to lie, I was barely holding it together. Being in the front seat was not helping that much, but I was just like so
Like, I
embarrassed.
just moved this girl. I gotta
I'm like, I know.
Yeah.
I'm so embarrassed about this situation. So I'm like, I just have to pretend I'm okay. I just have to pretend.
Yeah. And they're like, are you crying? And you're like, no, that's just
It's the
cheek
wind
sweat.
from the window.
Yeah.
They were nice about it, but I was like, okay, wait, that's not normal. And that's new. And I hadn't dealt with that before.
Yeah.
It's crazy how long the anxiety stays.
Does that feel like it's changed over time since your younger son? How old is your youngest now?
My youngest is 22 months. Just
Okay.
about.
Yeah.
I still have anxiety. It's not normal. I'm like, is this ever going to go back?
Yeah.
It's a little better. Like I went in an elevator 2 or 3 times today.
Whoa, that's a
Look at
lot.
me.
That's a
Yeah,
lot
I
for
know.
a day.
Because my
Yeah.
kids love
That's
the
a lot
elevator.
for a
They
day.
kept making us go up and down. It was only 1 floor, thank gosh.
Uh,
But I'm not joking. Like we went to a hotel and they put us on like the second from the top floor.
mhm.
And I had to ask them if we could switch like down lower, a different
You didn't
route
want to walk
because
up like 18 flights of stairs.
I timed it. I was like, can I do this? And it was like the way how slow the elevator went. I'm like, I can't do this over and
Yeah.
over again my whole stay. It's just going to give me anxiety the whole time.
You're right.
So
Yeah,
I
that's no
did
fun.
end up using the elevator, but it just was from a lower floor, so I wasn't in it as long. It was
Yeah.
like less risky. You know, I'm like,
Yeah.
I have like super weird anxiety things. I'm like,
No.
and
It's really
so
interesting because so far the things that people feel are the weirdest is the intrusive thoughts, and yours is like a different type of kind of physical manifestation of anxiety instead of like a mental image one. And it's funny how we all feel like, oh yeah, it's so weird, but we're all dealing with it in a different sort of expression.
Right. Yep.
right. And
Yeah.
it took me a while to realize that's what that was, because I had claustrophobia before. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is why it's worse.
Yeah, that's wild.
So the last thing I want to mention is just that one of the biggest differences for me with having this breech baby is I knew he was breech like the whole time, and I was
Mhm.
prepared for it. So I have some resources to share with you if you want me to email them to you.
Yeah,
But
perfect. I'll put them in the show notes. That would be amazing.
I think that could help people.
Yeah.
Just like
Sure. That's awesome.
websites and things that have like really good information backed up by research.
Yeah.
And some things are just like YouTube hypnobirthing, but it's hard to find people who are supportive of breech. Everybody thinks, ooh, we got to get rid of that. But there
Yeah.
is a way to embrace it to help you calmly go into that situation. And so I found a lot of support in that way. Since I was expecting it this time, I was prepared.
Yeah.
And I'm still really proud of myself for having my breech VBAC. And my baby is fine.
I'm proud of you too, girl.
And he's doing so well. He got discharged from the NICU at 1 year old, and he hasn't had any delays. The whole time he had 0 delays.
That's awesome.
They did a bunch of brain scans. They all came back normal. There's no evidence of any kind of brain damage, which is what they feared. So
Yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Yeah. And now you get to
Happy
join
ending.
the club of having 2 little boys running around. Well, Sarah has
Yeah.
1 girl, but
Yeah.
a lot of these people we've interviewed have a bunch of boys running around. The boys are more prevalent right now.
I feel like
But
it goes in like phases.
yeah. Yeah. How do you like being a boy mom?
I like it a lot. I was afraid to have girls, honestly, just because I was a tomboy.
Yeah.
I wasn't really into a lot of girly things. I grew up on a 100-acre farm. I just wasn't very girly. So I was
Yeah.
like, what will I do? I remember saying like, what if she like likes all these pink princesses and stuff? And I'm like, I don't know if I'll know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Now it seems so silly that I said that. I'm like, really? I really thought that way. But
Yeah.
when I was first pregnant, I was a little nervous to have a girl. So it's been good. But now I
That's
feel
good.
outnumbered. I'm ready to balance the scales.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay. Well, you'll see.
we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming, Allie. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing. And I know those resources will be really helpful, so I'll make sure they're included in the show notes for this episode so that everybody can kind of reach out and find the support that they need.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Allie. Thank you for listening to Postpartum Unfiltered.
If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, comment, or leave a review.
You can follow us on Instagram at postpartum.unfiltered.
If you feel called to share your postpartum experience, please contact us on Instagram or at drjilliancampbell.com.